Welcome to the Twist News. I'm Erika Grey. Today I'm going to be interviewing Shaheen Gobadi, the Paris-based spokesperson and member of the Foreign Affairs Council of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. Welcome, Shaheen, to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and you're all the way over there in Paris.
Indeed, that's true.
Is that where your headquarters?
Actually, it's in north of Paris. It's a place called Auvers-sur-Oise, which is north of Paris. And as you said, this is the headquarters of the NCRI, but we have offices all over the world. You know, a big office in Washington, London, Rome, Stockholm, Brussels, and all the major European capitals. And actually, the NCRI is the parliament in exile of the Iranian resistance. And as I said, it's based all over the world, and we support associations in all 5 continents, basically.
So you're a pretty big organization.
Indeed it is. I think that is somewhat an understatement. What do I mean by this is that I think the fact of the matter is, when it comes to Iran, this has been the biggest missing factor, the biggest unknown factor so far as the Iranian situation and the future of Iran is concerned.
Well, that's why I'm so excited to have you on the show. Because
go ahead, please.
Because of Iran, and I would love you to talk about Iran, the potential danger of Iran in the Middle East, and tell us all about it. And also where Iran is at right now, because what's circulating in the news is that the younger generation is not wanting the clerics and that Iran is on the verge of revolutions. But first, I'd like you to talk about what danger does Iran pose to not just the Middle East, but also to the West. And we know what Iran is doing against Israel. It's financing all these proxies. So I'd love you to talk more about that and about your view of Iran.
Basically, if I may introduce the resistance a bit, because I think this is very much intertwined about what the prospect would look like. The National Council of Resistance is a coalition of Iranian opposition movements. Politically speaking, it's anti-Shah, the former monarch, which was overthrown by a massive revolution in 1979, which was obviously a dictatorial regime, and also against the ruling theocracy, which is like a middle-age regime. NCRI has its president-elect, Madam Maryam Rajavi, who is leading basically the resistance against the mullahs. The main organization of the NCRI is called the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, which predates the 1979 revolution. The NCRI has been in existence for 44 years, and it has been struggling and striving against the theocratic rule for the last more than 4 decades. To give an idea how big of a movement we are talking about inside Iran, in the course of the past 4 decades alone, more than 120,000 activists have been executed in Iran, 90% of whom belong to this movement. So,
wow.
Yes, and we are talking about girls as young as 13 years old, which we have documented, have been executed solely for distributing the newspapers and leaflets of the resistance, and grandmothers as old as 72 years old. And we are talking about people from all walks of life, all age groups, and all over the country. So it's a massive, massive nationwide resistance. So far as outside of Iran is concerned, the NCRI enjoys massive support among the diaspora in dozens and dozens of countries. For instance, the annual gatherings in support of the NCRI draws somewhere like 100,000 activists who come as far away as Australia, New Zealand, and the Middle East, and throughout Europe and North America for the annual gathering. In terms of political view of the NCRI, Madam Rajavi has introduced a 10-point plan for the future of Iran for a transitional period when the mullahs are gone, which basically calls for separation of government and religion, calls for total gender equality, calls for total freedom of association, freedom of thought, and so on and so forth. It calls for mutual, amicable, amiable relationship with the rest of the world, calls for a free market economy, calls for a non-nuclear Iran, and abolishment of death penalty, and rights for all the national minorities, in particular the right of autonomy for the Kurdish people. So it's a very, very modern, forward-looking program. The plan is when the Ayatollahs are overthrown by the Iranian people, the NCRI would be like the transitional government for a maximum period of 6 months, to set the stage for a free and fair election to choose the next National and Constituent Assembly, which immediately starts writing the new constitution by the people's elected representatives. And this should be done in no longer than 2 years. And after that, whatever people of Iran decide, they decide. So this is the future of Iran that we envision. this program, the platform of Madam Mariam Rajavi, known as her 10-point plan, is very well received internationally. Among them, the majority members.
It's ideal. It sounds like it would be wonderful. Wonderful for Iran, but also wonderful for the nations that deal with Iran, or could potentially now deal with Iran with that kind of a government.
Actually, as you very correctly said, it would be a new dawn, not only for Iran, obviously, but for the whole Middle East and, in a bigger picture for the whole world, in a grand scheme of things. And to that matter, majority members of the U.S. House of Representatives, in a very, very bipartisan way, have expressed their support for Madam Rajavi and her 10-point plan. The same with a large number of the U.S. senators, again, in a bipartisan, and many, many former senior officials and top brass military commanders. And the same is true with the majority members of the House of Commons in the UK and their peers in the House of Lords, the majority members of the French Assemblée Nationale. In a nutshell, more than 4,000 elected officials have endorsed the plan. So basically what I'm trying to say is that there is a viable alternative to the mullahs with a very, very strong movement inside the country, with a clear plan, with the international recognition, with an identifiable leader. So when comes the time for big change in Iran and the regime is overthrown by the Iranian people, there will be a very smooth transition and very clear roadmap. So there will not be any chaos or anything like this at all.
That's very well thought out. My question is, what is the status of what's happening in Iran? And I know you can't know that exactly, but what is your group gauging concerning the direction of the people and a possible overthrow of the mullahs? I've heard that it's growing within Iran.
Actually, you are very correct. There's a revolution in the making. A lot of people do not appreciate the fact that there have been 4 major nationwide uprisings in Iran calling for the regime's overthrow by the people and establishment of a democratic secular republic in the last 7 years alone. And each time it's getting bigger, more inclusive, more pervasive. The first one was in January 2018, the next one was in November 2019, then it was January 2020, and the latest one, I think everybody recalls, that began in September 2022, last 4 months. And that involved all 31 provinces of Iran, over like 300 cities. Men and women, boys and girls from all different generations, from middle class, lower class, they're all united in calling for the regime's overthrow, and also by slogans like down with oppressor, being the Shah or the leader. They showed that they don't want to go back to the time of the Shah, which was again a repressive regime, but they are looking for a future. So in that sense, I think obviously each of these uprisings have been suppressed brutally by the regime and the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, IRGC, which is the entity that has kept this regime in power by sheer brutality and also export of terror outside of Iran. But the factors and elements that led to those uprisings not only have not subsided, rather have exacerbated. So, for instance, rampant unemployment, level of poverty, massive corruption, nepotism, all of them, and repression, all have got much worse since 2022 to 2023. So a lot of the regime's own officials, their experts, their analysts, even the state press and the state media are almost every day warning that another bigger uprising is at the making.
So that's what you're anticipating is a tipping point. The tipping point, is that what you're talking about?
Exactly, but we are not only anticipating, we are working towards this diligently day in and day out from inside Iran. Today, there is a big network of what they call resistance units in Iran, which are affiliated to the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, which basically like the sledgehammer, trying to break the spell of repression by burning big pictures of Khamenei, the statue of Qasem Soleimani, the former commander of the Revolutionary Guards Corps, Quds Force, by putting big banners of Mrs. Rajavi, writing graffiti, urging people to stand up. And actually, it's very, very risk-taking, and a lot of the resistance units have been picked up by the regime.
I was going to ask that next about the resistance movements, and are they being arrested, and you're actually talking about that.
Indeed, and some of them are now on death row. Actually today, more than 300 dignitaries from all over the world urged the UN to intervene to prevent execution of 2 of them whose death sentence to be implemented is very imminent. And there are a good number of them who are basically on death row. But despite all these risks and all the danger, and despite all the crackdown, the network is growing. So we are not just
Oh, so the resistance movement is growing in Iran.
big numbers, and especially the young generation, as you said, because that's the role of the resistance. There's a big potential for change. All the factors that create that kind of situation are building up. So that's where we are today. Now, for years, the regime survived on two pillars. One pillar was repression at home. Misogyny, doubling down on women as second-class citizens. I think a lot of your viewers are quite familiar with this basic conduct of the regime. But the other leg or the other pillar of the regime is regional meddling. By propping up proxies, by exporting terrorism, by basically meddling in affairs of other countries to compensate their shortcomings at home, to create this image of strength and lasting power for the supreme leader Ali Khamenei. And guess what? In the last year and a half or 2 years, that also has received blows after blows. Hezbollah was very much decimated in 2024. Houthis are being beaten on a daily basis, and the climax of it was the overthrow of Bashar Assad regime in Syria in such an spotlight matter, which was basically the linchpin of the regime's regional strategy. And one has to keep in mind that the regional strategy was not a foreign policy issue. As I said, it was a pillar of survival. So, having said this,
but the strategy also was really going at Israel, and it appeared to me that it wasn't just about religious ideology, but it was also about product. And it was about the proxies, the two-state solution. And I felt in my own research that the world was not really recognizing the threat of Iran to the Middle East. I'd like you to talk about that a little more, current Iran. And also with if it achieved its goal in Israel and was the two-state would have just been a proxy, and then it could then acquire the state, acquire the gas, acquire the goods. Now it would be king in the Middle East. And so just like your opinion on that, I felt that many Western nations are not really recognizing how threatening Iran really is, not just to the Middle East, but how that would then affect the West.
In a way, I think you made a very, very correct assessment of the situation. We always maintained that the head of the snake for war and belligerence and extremism in the whole Middle East is the ruling theocracy in Iran. This export of terrorism and wreaking havoc is in the DNA of this regime. It would not survive without it. First it was the Iran-Iraq war, and when that ran its course and the regime was defeated, they created these proxies, and this has brought major destitution to the Iranian people. Going back to your previous question, Iran being a very rich nation, a country with second biggest gas reserve in the world, with the fourth biggest oil reserve in the world, and lots of minerals. Iran has about 1% of the world population and has somewhere about 8 to 9% of the minerals of the world. So it's
8 to 9%?
Yeah.
That is a major amount.
Exactly, for 1% of the population. So every Iranian keeps wondering, while they should be very, very affluent and God has given them, and they're very talented people, why they are living in such a destitution. According to the regime's own figures, 70% of the people now live below the poverty line. 70%. So that's why people are so outraged. Poverty on one side, lack of future the other side, repression added to it. So that's why the situation is so explosive. Now, what has been the regime's response? More killing and more killing and more killing, and also stepping up its drive to acquire nuclear weapon as the guarantor for their survival. But why Iran today is very different than 5 years ago or 10 years ago is that now, as you say, all the chickens are coming home to roost. All the things that they did over the years are now basically the regime Khamenei, the supreme leader, is facing the confluence of a crisis after crisis that they built, and now the tide is turning back and they are in a very, very big bind. So going back to your original observation, I think the Western governments not only underestimated the regime's threat, but also they had a very, very misguided policy vis-a-vis Iran for 3 decades or so, and even longer. The approach towards the regime was what I call in one word appeasement, placating, trying to find this illusionary, non-existent moderate faction within the regime and trying to prop it up by providing all sorts of concessions. And the result is before us. The regime is on the cusp of, becoming a nuclear regime, supporting all these proxies, so repressive at home. So it's time to change the whole narrative, to change the whole paradigm. The mullah's main enemy is within, the Iranian people, the young people who want change. In order to change the whole momentum, the missing link in the Western policy about Iran has been the role of the Iranian people and the organized resistance. That is what has been missing in the approach and policy for the last 4 decades. And now is the time to change it altogether. And this is a very crucial moment. The mullahs are in the biggest point in the past 4 decades. As I said, economy is in tank, the population is outraged, ready to come out. There's an organized resistance growing. Regionally, the regime has never been any weaker. A lot of the proxies that they propped up all these years are basically have become, they are fighting for their own survival, let's put it like this. Their main strategic allies, Bashar Assad and Syria, is gone. So now is the time. But what is a good policy? For years, the regime pushed this narrative by its, appeasers and its advocates that there are only 2 options. You either placate the mullahs, you appease them and give them big concessions, or the other option is to go to war with them. And obviously, who wants to go to war with Iran? Nobody. So at the end of the day, all these governments, Western governments, ended up providing concessions after concessions, and Tehran had the last laugh. But now we think it's the time to realize there's a very good chance of change from within, and that's a game changer. So what we propose to the West: number 1, stifle the regime's, economic pipeline. No oil or gas sale, because every penny, every dime that this regime gets does not go to the Iranian people. It's either to finance the repression at home, their nuclear weapons program,
Yes.
or the proxies in the region, or it's plundered. The amount of plundering and nepotism that is prevalent in Iran today is beyond comprehension. We are talking about literally billions and billions and billions of dollars a year which are plundered. So stifle these regimes, economic means. For European countries, they should designate the Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist entity. America has done this already. To activate the UN security.
Wasn't the European Union on the verge of doing that? Hasn't that been, I know that was an issue, and have they now recognized them as a terrorist?
No, they have not. Actually, again, when I'm talking about appeasement, that's,
But isn't it also because there's the groups that are also have infiltrated within the European Union, some of these Islamic groups that have infiltrated and are also influencing some policy?
Yes, they have been influencing the policy, but you will be surprised. They are quote-unquote experts, which are been providing advice to the Western governments, which are actually controlled and directed from Tehran. But they look like, very benign type of academicians.
Yes, and they're also in the media. It's
Exactly.
also, the influence.
Exactly.
Well, I want Qatar.
And guess
They
what
both
is
share an
their,
oil field, Qatar and Iran.
and you know what? And guess one of the major tenets of their narrative has always been softy vis-a-vis Iran. And coupled with this, their narrative was to keep the opposition, namely NCRI, at arm's length. So that was the point Tehran basically wanted them to parrot. And they did. They said, look, or if you start warming up to the resistance, that will be very badly received in Tehran, and you don't want to rock the boat. So and they said, this is red line of the red lines for the mullahs, and don't come even close. So basically, not only they gave bad advice by urging the Europeans and the others to provide concession, they also urged them to stay away from the resistance. And that's exactly what the mullahs wanted to see and hear. As I said, talking points basically came from Tehran. Now, going back to the concept of, and the last point of the policy should be also activating the UN Security Council resolutions against Iran. And last but not the least is to recognize the right of the Iranian people for a regime change by themselves and to standing up against IRGC. We are not seeking any money or free weapons or boots on the ground from Western governments. There is no need for this. We are not calling for this. The Iranian problem has an Iranian solution. We have fought against this regime for 4 decades. We have come all this way on our own merit, basically. But all we ask for is a good policy. Going back to your original observation, which is very correct, a good policy that will obviously benefit the Iranian people, first and foremost, but also the whole region and the world. And we think the sooner, the better. Too much time has been wasted. For too long, the issue of Iran basically has been kicked down the hill. But there's not much time left. So we think we are at a very, very crucial juncture. Once again, when Madam Mariam Rajavi, the president-elect of the NCRI, testified online. She's based in Paris before some committees in the U.S. House of Representatives in January. She pointedly said that we are not seeking U.S. financial support, we are not seeking U.S. military support, we are not proposing boots on the grounds, but we think time has come for a good policy, and that good policy is what I just enumerated. So basically, I think if one wants to change the whole equation about Iran, it's time to bring in the factor that has been not brought into the calculation for too long, and that's the role of the people and the Iranian resistance. And trust me, if that's done, that puts the mullahs on notice immediately. They
Well, it sounds
realize
like an excellent plan. I mean, that, and it sounds like an excellent piece that's missing.
exactly. Now, your viewers, what they can do, they can go to the members of the Congress, they can go to their senators, they can, advocate about this concept that, look, there is a nationwide resistance in Iran, which has, as I said, fought for 4 decades, is growing despite huge number of good people who have lost their lives. And they are not seeking anybody's intervention. They are not asking for a war at all. The narrative that the choice is either war or cutting it only to the mullah's benefit is a narrative that mullahs and their proponents and this type of academicians that you said propagated years and years. Now the time has come to say, look, this is debunked and there is another alternative.
And what's your opinion as far as Iran's relationship with Russia?
Well, mullahs will grab at any straws they can get. We saw what's happening in the war in Ukraine. Iran is providing drones, and from the first look at it, people say, what has got Iran to do with this? But look, whenever you see, in our neighborhood, havoc and crisis, you have the fingers of the mullahs on the pipe because, as I said, they always needed this to complement their repression at home. From the day one that they came to power, they knew it was not their revolution. Basically, Khomeini hijacked the Iranian People's Revolution in 1979. They have imposed themselves on the Iranian people by sheer force and this kind of a demagogy, which I call, for the last 4.5 decades. So far as Russia is concerned, obviously the regime hopes that they can get some help from Russia, but everybody knows that obviously the pivot to the Russia and Chinese would not be a strategic guarantee for the regime. For instance, Chinese do a lot of trade with Iran, but guess what? It's mostly on cash basis. So they're not even giving Iran credit lines because they know this regime is not, its survival is very, very, very risky, and it is, basically what I call borrowed time. So no country in the world can save this regime. I can tell you this quite confidently.
Okay, and my final question is Iran's overemphasis on Israel. All of its proxies are attacking Israel. Would you like to comment on that? And also the two-state solution. My opinion is that the two-state solution is a diversion in the Middle East region so that nobody's looking at Iran and they're looking at a policy that doesn't make geoeconomic or geopolitical sense, and they're looking at a policy that essentially Iran would have a foothold through its proxies into the nation. So I'd like your opinion on that as a final commentary.
Well, I think as long as you have the current regime in Iran in power, you would not see peace, tranquility in the Middle East. That's totally inconceivable. And unlike what a lot of people thought in the past, it's not about Shiite, Sunni, or this regime only helps the Shiites or only helps the, so on and so forth. They help any extremist group one can conceive in order, as I said, to pursue their sinister, malign objective.
And would you say their objective is financial? Is it
No, absolutely not. No, they always had this idea. Their idea from the day one is to have their own type of a regime throughout the whole Middle East. From the day one, this was the idea of Khomeini to have an Islamic caliphate. Look, in the 1980s, the idea of this regime was we continued the war with Iraq, which meant sending, tens of thousands of teenagers on the minefields as cannon fodder. And their slogan was, we will liberate Jerusalem via Karbala. And Karbala being the holiest place for the Shiite Muslims. And, they said, we have to liberate Karbala at the time and then go all the way to Jerusalem. And that was their motto. So
you're saying Iran is motivated by its Islamic theological aspirations.
No, don't take me wrong. This regime, I'm not talking about Iran, I'm talking about this regime.
I'm sorry, I meant to say this regime in Iran.
And you have to remember, this has nothing to do with religion. These people are using this as a pretext to pursue their sinister objective.
And what's the ultimate sinister objective of Iran?
To have a religious caliphate headquartered in Iran, that Iran will be the metropole of this ideology in the whole Middle East. And look, why they are creating all these proxy groups, why are they propping them up? As I said, this is like, in 1993, that's 32 years ago, Mr. Muhammad Mahdisin, who is the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, published a book, 1993. The title of the book was Islamic Fundamentalism, the New Global Threat. In 1993. Now, and we said, look, the metropole and the headquarters of this concept is in Tehran. Obviously, as you said very correctly, a lot of people in the West did not listen, did not pay proper attention, and this was not given due consideration. But now it's proven this was very correct, that Islamic fundamentalism is the global threat. And as I said, if anybody had any doubts, look, what's the role of Iran? As I said, the head of the snake, with the Houthis in Yemen, with Hezbollah in Lebanon, all these Shiite groups in Iraq, and so on and so forth. Going back to your last question, so long as this regime is in power, you would not have peace and tranquility in the Middle East. And I think all the discussions about having a Middle East living in peace and coexistence can be addressed after this regime is gone. But that is the task of the Iranian people and the Iranian resistance. This is not the task of any foreign nation or anything like this. But the good point is that the Iranian people have a viable resistance, they have a viable democratic alternative, they are striving for it, and I think it's now time for change the paradigm and put the mullahs on notice. I think 2025 is a very crucial year to that effect.
That's actually very good news. It's very good news for the region, and it's also very good news for the West. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. You were a wealth of information. This was unbelievably informative. And definitely, I'm going to have you back to give reports and let us know how the resistance is doing.
Thank you for having me on, and good luck to you and all your viewers.
That was some broadcast. Unbelievably informative. And I was not expecting that what was going to be presented was a roadmap. That's right, a roadmap to the next leadership of Iran and how plans are already in place. Well, definitely stay tuned for more. And if you don't subscribe, be sure to hit that subscribe button now. This has been Erika Grey of the Twist News.